Wealth, Essay 3 of Conduct of Life. Conduct of Life by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Fate. Who shall tell you what did befall far away in time when once over the lifeless ball hung idle stars and suns? What God the elements obeyed, wings of what wind the lichen bore, wafting the puny seeds of power, which, lodged in rocks, the rock upbraid. And well the primal pioneer knew the strong task to it assigned, patient though heaven's enamored year, to build in matter home for mind. From air of creeping centuries drew this matted thicket low and wide. This must the leaves of ages strew, the granite slab of cloth and hide, ere wheat can wave its golden pride. What smiths and in what furnace rolled, in dizzy aeons, dim and mute, the reeling brain can ill compute, copper and iron, lead and gold. What oldest star the fame can save, of race perishing to pave, the planet with a floor of lime, dust is their pyramid and mole. Who saw what firms and palms were pressed under the tumbling mountains' breasts, in the safe herbal of the coal. But when the quarry means were piled, all is waste and worthless till arrives the wise selecting will, and out of the slime and chaos wit draws the threads of fair and fit. Then temples rose in towns and marts, the shop of toil, the hall of arts. Then flew the sails across the seas to feed the north from tropic trees. The strong wind wove the torrent span, where they were bid the rivers ran. New slaves fulfilled the poet's dream, galvanic wire, strong-shouldered stream. Then docks were built, and crops were stored, and ingots added to the hoard. But though light-handed man forget, remembering matter pays her debt, still through her motes and masses draw electric thrills and tides of law, which bring the strength of nature wild to the conscience of a child. As soon as a stranger is introduced into any company, one of the first questions which all wish to have answered is, how does that man get his living? And with reason. He is no whole man until he knows how to earn a blameless livelihood. Society is barbarous until every industrious man can get his living without dishonest customs. Every man is a consumer and ought to be a producer. He fails to make his place good in the world unless he not only pays his debt but also adds something to the commonwealth. Nor can he do justice to his genius without making some larger demand on the world than a bare subsistence. He is by constitution expensive and needs to be rich. Wealth has its source in applications of the mind to nature, from the rudest strokes of spade and axe up to the last secrets of art. Intimate ties subsist between thought and all production, because a better order is equivalent to vast amounts of brute labor. The forces and resistances are nature's, but the mind acts in bringing things from where they bound to where they are wanted, in wise combining, in directing the practice of the useful arts, and in the creation of finer values, by fine art, by eloquence, by song, or the reproductions of memory. Wealth is in applications of mind to nature, and the art of getting rich consists not in industry, much less in saving, but in better order, in timeliness, in being at the right spot. One man has stronger arms, or longer legs, another sees by the course of streams and grows of markets, where land will be wanted, makes a clearing of the river, goes to sleep, and wakes up rich. Steam is no stronger now than it was 100 years ago, but is put to better use. A clever fellow was acquainted with the expansive force of steam. He also saw the wealth of wheat and grass rotting in Michigan. Then he cunningly screws on the steam pipe to the wheat crop. Puff now, O steam. The steam puffs and expands as before, but this time it is dragging all Michigan on its back to hungry New York and hungry England. Coal lay in ledges under the ground since the flood, until a laborer with pick and windlass brings it to the surface. We may well call it black diamonds. Every basket is power and civilization, for coal is a portable climate. It carries the heat of the tropics to Labrador and the polar circle, and is the means of transporting itself whithersoever it is wanted. Watt and Stephenson whispered in the ear of mankind their secret, that half ounce of coal will draw 2 tons a mile, and coal carries coal, by rail and by boat, to make Canada as warm as Calcutta, and with its comfort brings its industrial power. When the farmer's peaches are taken from under the tree and carried into town, they have a new look, and a 100-fold value over the fruit which grew on the same bough, and lies fulsomely on the ground. The craft of the merchant is this, bringing things to where it abounds, to where it is costly. Wealth begins in a tight roof that keeps the rain and wind out, in a good pump that yields you plenty of sweet water, in 2 clean suits so to change your dress when you are wet, in dry sticks to burn, in a good double-wick lamp, and 3 meals, in a horse or a locomotive to cross the land, in the boat to cross the sea, in tools to work with, in books to read, and so, in giving on all sides, by tools and auxiliaries, the greatest possible extension of our powers, as if it added feet and hands and eyes and blood, length of the days, and knowledge and goodwill. Wealth begins with these articles of necessity, and here we must recite the iron law which nature thunders in these northern climates. First, she requires that each man should feed himself. If happily his father has left him no inheritance, he must go to work, and by making his wants less, or his gains more, he must draw himself out of the state of pain and insult in which she forces the beggar to lie. She gives him no rest until this is done. She starves, taunts, and torments him, takes away warmth, laughter, sleep, friends, and daylight, until he has fought his way for his own loaf. Then, less peremptorily, and still with sting enough, she urges him to the acquisition of such things as belong to him. Every warehouse and shop window, every fruit tree, and every thought of every hour opens a new want to him which it concerns his power and dignity to gratify. It is of no use to argue the wants down. The philosophers have laid the greatness of man in making his wants few. But will a man content himself with a hut and a handful of dried peas? He is born to be rich. He is thoroughly related, and is tempted out by his appetites, and fancies to the conquest of this or that piece of nature, until he finds his well-being and the use of his planet, and of more planets than his own. Wealth requires, beside the crust of bread on the roof, a freedom of the city, a freedom of the earth, traveling, machinery, the benefits of science, music, and fine arts, the best culture, and the best company. He is the rich man who can avail himself of all men's faculties. He is the richest who knows how to draw a benefit from the labors of the greatest number of men in distant countries and in past times. The same correspondence that is between thirst in the stomach, the water in the spring, exists between the whole man and the whole of nature. The elements offer their service to him. The sea, washing the equator and the poles, offers its perilous aid, and the power and the empire that follow it, day by day to his craft and audacity. Beware of me, it says, but if you can hold me, I am the key to all the lands. Fire offers, on its side, an equal power. Fire, steam, lightning, gravity, ledges of rock, mines of iron, lead, quicksilver, tin, and gold. Forests of all woods, fruits of all climates, animals of all habits, the power of tillage, the fabric of its chemical laboratory, the webs of its looms, the masculine draught of his locomotives, the talismans of his machine shop, all grand and subtle things, minerals, gases, ethers, passions, war, trade, government, are his natural playmates, and according to the excellence of the machinery in each human being, is his attraction for the instruments he is to employ. The world is his tool chest, and he is successful, or his education is carried out in so far as the marriage of his faculties with nature, or the degree in which he takes up things into himself. The strong race is strong on these terms. The Saxons are the merchants of the world, now, for 1,000 years, the leading race, and by nothing more than their quality of personal independence, and in its special modification, pecuniary independence. No reliance for bread and games on the government, no clanship, no patriarchal style of living by the revenues of chief, no marrying on, no system of clientship suits them, but every man must pay his scot. The English are prosperous and peaceable, with their habit of considering that every man must take care of himself, and he has himself to thank if he do not maintain and improve his position in society. The subject of economy mixes itself with morals, inasmuch as it is a peremptory point of virtue that a man's independence be secured. Poverty demoralizes. A man in debt is so far a slave, and Wall Street thinks it easy for a millionaire to be a man of his word, a man of honor, but that, in failing circumstance, no man can be relied on to keep up his integrity. And when one observes in the hotels and palaces of our Atlantic capitals the habit of expense, the riot of the senses, the absence of bonds, clanship, fellow feeling of any kind, he feels that, when a man or woman is driven to the wall, the chances of integrity are frightfully diminished, as if virtue were coming to a luxury which few could afford, or, as Burke said, at a market almost too high for humanity. He may fix his inventory of necessities and his enjoyments on what scale he pleases, but if he wishes the power and privilege of thought, the chalking out of his own career, and having society on its own terms, he must bring his wants within his proper power to satisfy. The manly part is to do with might and main what you can do. The world is full of fops who never did anything, and who have persuaded beauties and men of genius to wear their fop livery, and these will deliver the fop opinion that it is not respectable to be seen earning a living. It is much more respectable to spend without earning. And this doctrine of the snake will come also from the elect sons of light, for wise men are not wise at all hours, and will speak 5 times from their taste or their humor to 1 of their reason. The brave workman, who might betray his feelings in his manners, if he do not succumb in his practice, must replace the grace or elegance fortified by the merit of the work done, no matter whether he makes shoes or statutes or laws. It is the privilege of any human work which is well done to invest the doer with a certain haughtiness. He can well afford not to conciliate, whose faithful work will answer for him. The mechanic at his bench carries a quiet heart and assured manners, and deals on even terms with men of any condition. The artist has made his picture so true that it disconcerts criticism. The statue is so beautiful that it contracts no stain from the market, and makes the market a silent gallery for itself. The case of the young lawyer was pitiful to discuss, a paltry matter of buttons and tweezer cases, but the determined youth saw in it an aperture to insert his dangerous wedges, made the insignificance of the thing forgotten, and gave fame by a sense of energy to the name and affairs of the Tittleton snuff-box factory. Society in large towns is babyish, and wealth is made a toy. The life of pleasure is so ostentatious that a shallow observer must believe that this is the agreed best use of wealth, and whatever is pretended, it ends in cosseting. But if this were the main use of surplus capital, it would bring us to the barricades, burned towns, and tomahawks presently. Men of sense esteem wealth to be the assimilation of nature to themselves, the converting of the sap and juices of the planet to the incarnation and nutriment of their design. Power is what they want, not candy, power to execute their design, power to give legs and feet, form and actuality to their thought, which, to a clear-sighted man, appears the end for which the universe exists, and all its resources might be well applied. Columbus thinks that the sphere is a problem for practical navigation, as well as for closet geometry, and looks on all kings and peoples as cowardly landsmen until they dare fit him out. Few men on the planet have more truly belonged to it, but he was forced to leave much of his map blank. His successors inherited his map, and inherited his fury to complete it. So the men of the mine, telegraph, mill, map, and survey, the monomaniacs who talk of their projects in marts and offices and entreat men to subscribe, how did their factories get built? How did North America get netted with iron rails, except by the importunity of these orators, who dragged all the prudent men in? Is party the madness of many for the gain of the few? This speculative genius is the madness of the few for the gain of the world. The projectors are sacrificed, but the public is the gainer. Each of these idealists, working after his thought, would make it tyrannical if he could. He's met and antagonized by other speculators, as hot as he. The equilibrium is preserved by their counteractions, so one tree keeps down another in the forest, that it may not absorb all the sap in the ground. And the supply and nature of railroad presidents, copper miners, grand junctioners, smoke burners, fire annihilators, etc., is limited by the same law which keeps the proportion in the law of carbon, of alum, and of hydrogen. To be rich is to have a ticket of admission to the masterworks and chief men of each race. Is to have the sea by voyaging, to visit the mountains, Niagara, the Nile, the desert, Rome, Paris, Constantinople, to see galleries, libraries, arsenals, manufactories. The reader of Humboldt's Cosmos follows the marches of a man whose eyes, ears, and mind are armed by all of science, arts, and implements which mankind have anywhere accumulated, and who is using these to add to the stock. So it is with Denon, Beckford, Belzoni, Wilkinson, Layard, Kane, Lepsius, and Livingston. The rich man, said Sadi, is everywhere expected and at home. The rich take up something more of the world into man's life. They include the country as well as the town, the ocean side, the White Hills, the far west, and the old European homesteads of man, in the notion of available material. The world is his, who has money to go over it. He arrives at the seashore, and the sumptuous ship has floored and carpeted for him the stormy Atlantic, and made it a luxurious hotel amid the horrors and tempests. The Persians say, 'tis the same to him who wears a shoe as if the whole world were covered in leather. Kings are said to have long arms, but every man should have long arms, and should pluck his living, his instruments, his power, and his knowing from the sun, moon, and stars. Is not then the demand for it to be rich legitimate? Yet I have never seen a rich man. I have never seen a man as rich as all men ought to be, or with an adequate command of nature. The pulpit and the press have many commonplaces denouncing the thirst for wealth. But if men should take these moralists at their word, and leave off aiming to be rich, the moralists would rush to rekindle at all hazards this love of power in the people, lest civilization should be undone. Men are urged by their ideas to acquire the command over nature. Ages derive a culture from the wealth of Roman Caesars, Leal Tents, magnificent kings of France, Grand Dukes of Tuscany, Dukes of Devonshire, Townleys, Vernons, and Peels in England, or whatever great proprietors. It is the interest of all men that should be Vaticans and Louvres, full of noble works of art, British museums and French gardens of plants, Philadelphia academies in natural history, Bodleian, Ambrosian, Royal, Congressional libraries. It is the interest of all who there should be exploring expeditions, Captain Cooks to voyage around the world, Rosses, Franklins, Richardsons, and Kanes, to find the magnetic and the geographic poles. We are all richer for the measurement of a degree of latitude on the earth's surface. Our navigation is safer for the chart. How intimately our knowledge of the system of the universe rests on that, and a true economy in a state or an individual will forget its frugality in behalf of claims like these. Whilst it is each man's interest that not only ease and convenience of living, but also wealth or surplus product should exist somewhere, it need not be in his hands. Often it is very undesirable to him. Goethe said, nobody should be rich who does not understand it. Some men are born to own, and can animate all their possessions. Others cannot. Their owning is not graceful. It seems to be a compromise to their character. They seem to steal their own dividends. They should own who can administer, not they who hoard and conceal, not they who, the great proprietors they are only the great beggars, but whose work carves out work for more, opens the path for all. For he is a rich man in whom the people are rich, and he is a poor man in whom the people are poor, and how to give all access to the masterpieces of art and nature is the problem of civilization. The socialism of our day has done good service in setting men on thinking how certain civilization benefits, not only enjoyed by the opulent, can be enjoyed by all. For example, the providing of each man the means of apparatus of science and of the arts. There are many articles good for occasional use, which few men are able to own. Every man wishes to see the rings of Saturn, the satellites and belts of Jupiter and Mars, the mountains and craters of the moon, but how few can own a telescope, and of those scarcely one would like the trouble of keeping it in order and exhibiting it. So of electrical and chemical apparatus, and many of the other things. Every man may have occasion to consult books which he does not care to possess, such as encyclopedias, dictionaries, tables, charts, maps, and public documents. Pictures also of birds, beasts, fishes, shells, trees, flowers, whose names he desires to know. There is a refining influence from the arts of design on a prepared man, which is positive as that of music, not to be supplied from any other source, but pictures, engravings, statues, and casts, besides their first costs, entail expenses, as of galleries and keepers of the exhibition, and the uses which any man can make use of is rare, and their value too is much enhanced by the number of men who can share their enjoyment. In the Greek cities it was reckoned profane that any person should pretend a property in a work of art which belonged to all who could behold it. I think sometimes, could I only have music on my own terms, could I live in the great city, and know where I could go whenever I wished the ablution and inundation of musical waves, that were a bath and a medicine. If properties of this kind were owned by states, towns, and lyceums, they would draw the bonds of neighborhood closer. A town would exist to an intellectual purpose. In Europe, where the feudal forms secure the permanence of wealth in certain families, those families buy and preserve these things, and lay them open to the public. But in America, where democratic institutions divide every estate into smaller portions, after a few years, the public should step into the place of these proprietors and provide this cultural inspiration for the citizen. Man was born to be rich, or inevitably grows rich by the use of his faculties, by the union of thought with nature. Property is an intellectual production. The game requires coolness, right reasoning, promptness, and patience in the player. Cultivated labor drives our brute labor. An infinite number of shrewd men, in infinite years, have arrived at certain best and shortest ways of doing, and these accumulated skills in art, cultures, harvesting, curings, manufactures, navigations, expenses, exchanges, constitute the worth of our world today. Commerce is a game of skill, which every man cannot play, which few men can play well. The right merchant is one who has the just average of faculties we call common sense, a man of a strong affinity for facts, who makes up his decision on what he has seen. He is thoroughly persuaded by the truths of arithmetic. There is always a reason in the man for his good or bad fortune, and so in making money. Men talk as if there were some magic about it, and believe in magic in all parts of life. He knows that all goes on the old road, pound for pound, cent for cent, for every effect of perfect cause, and that good luck is another name for tenacity of purpose. He insures himself in every transaction, and likes small and sure gains. Probity and closeness of facts are the basis, but the masters of the arts add a certain long arithmetic. The problem is to combine many and remote operations, with the accuracy and adherence to the facts, which is easy in near and small transactions, so to arrive at gigantic results, without any compromise to safety. Napoleon was fond of telling the story of the Marseille banker, who said to the visitor, surprised at the contrast between the splendor of the banker's chateau and hospitality, and the meanness of the counting room in which he had seen him, "Young man, you are too young to understand how masses are formed. The true and only power, whether composed of money, water, or men, is all alike. A mass is an immense center of motion, but it must be begun, and it must be kept up." And he might have added that the way in which it must be begun and kept up is by obedience to the laws of particles. Success consists in close appliance to the laws of the world, and, since those laws are intellectual and moral, an intellectual and moral obedience. Political economy is as good a book wherein to read the life of man and the ascendancy of laws over all private and hostile influences as any Bible which has come down to us. Money is representative, and follows the nature and fortunes of its owner. The coin is a delicate meter of civil, social, and moral changes. The farmer is covetous of his dollar, and with reason. It is no waif to him. He knows how many strokes of labor it represents. His bones ache with the day's work that earned it. He knows how much land it represents, how much rain, frost, and sunshine. He knows that, in the dollar, he gives you so much discretion and patience, so much hoeing and threshing. Try to lift his dollar, you must lift all that weight. In the city, where money follows the skid of a pen, or a lucky rise in exchange, it comes to be looked at as light. I wish the farmer held it dear and would spend it only for real bread, force for force. The farmer's dollar is heavy, and the clerk's is light and nimble, leaps out of his pocket, jumps onto cards and faro tables, but still more curious is its susceptibility to metaphysical changes. It is the finest barometer of social storms and announces revolutions. Every step of civil advancement makes every man's dollar worth more. In California, the country where it grew, what would it buy? A few years since, it would buy a shanty, dysentery, hunger, bad company, and crime. There are wide countries like Siberia where it would buy little else today than some petty mitigation of suffering. In Rome, it will buy beauty and magnificence. 40 years ago, a dollar would not buy much in Boston. Now it will buy a great deal more in our old town, thanks to railroad, telegraph, steamers, and the contemporaneous growth of New York and the whole country. Yet there are many goods appertaining to a capital city which are not yet purchasable there. No, not with a mountain of dollars. A dollar in Florida is not worth a dollar in Massachusetts. A dollar is not value, but representative value, and at last of moral values. A dollar is rated for the corn it will buy, or, to speak strictly, not for the corn or house room, but for the Athenian corn and Roman house room, for the wit, probity, and power which will eat bread and dwell in houses to share and exert. Wealth is mental. Wealth is moral. The value of a dollar is to buy just things. A dollar goes on increasing in value with all the genius, all the virtues of the world. A dollar in a university is worth more than a dollar in jail, in a temperate, schooled, law-abiding community than in some sink of crime where dice, knives, and arsenic are in constant play. The banknote detector is a useful publication, but the current dollar, silver, or paper is itself the detector of the right and wrong where it circulates. Is it not instantly enhanced by the increase of equity? If a trader refuses to sell his vote or adheres to some odious right, he makes so much more equity in the Massachusetts, and every acre in the state is worth more in the house of his action. If you take out a State Street, the 10 honestest merchants, and put in 10 roguish persons, controlling the same amount of capital, the rates of insurance will indicate it, the soundness of the bank will show it. The highways will be less secure, the school will feel it, the children will bring home their little dose of the poison. The judge will sit less firmly on his bench, and his decisions will be less upright. He has lost so much support and constraint, which all need, and the pulpit will betray it, and he lacks the rule of life. An apple tree, if you take out every day for a number of days a load of loam, and put in a loam of sand about its roots, will find it out. An apple tree is a stupid kind of creature, but if this treatment be pursued for a short time, I think it will begin to mistrust something. And if you should take out the powerful class engaged in trade 100 good men, and put in 100 bad, or what is the same thing, introduce a demoralizing institution, would not the dollar, which is not much stupider than an apple tree, presently find it out? The value of a dollar is social, as it is created by society. Every man who removes into the city, with any appreciable talent or skill in him, gives to every man's labor in that city a new worth. If a talent is anywhere born into the world, the community of nations is enriched, and, much more, with a new degree of probity. The expense of crime, one of the principal charges of every nation, is so far stopped. In Europe, crime is observed to increase or abate with the price of bread. If the Rothschilds at Paris do not accept bills, the people of Manchester, at Paisley, and Birmingham are forced into the highways, and landlords are shot in Ireland. The police records attest it. The vibrations are presently felt in New York, New Orleans, and Chicago. Not much otherwise, the economical power touches the masses through the political lords. Rothschild refuses the Russian loan, and there is peace, and the harvests are saved, and an agitation through the large portion of mankind, and every hideous result ending in revolution and a new order. Wealth brings with it its own checks and balances. The basis of political economy is non-interference. The only safe rule is found in the self-adjusting meter of demand and supply. Do not legislate. Meddle, and you snap the sinews with your sumptuary laws. Give no bounties. Make equal laws. Secure life and property, and you need not give alms. Open the doors of opportunity to talent and virtue, and they will do themselves justice, and property will not be in bad hands. In a free and just commonwealth, property rushes to the idle and imbecile, to the industrious, brave, and persevering. The laws of nature play through trade, as a toy battery exhibits the effects of electricity. The level of the sea is not more surely kept than is the equilibrium of value in society, by the demands and supply, and the artifice of legislation punishes itself by reactions, gluts, and bankruptcies. The sublime laws play indifferently through atoms and galaxies. Whoever knows what happens in the getting and spending of a loaf of bread and a pint of beer, that no wishing will change the rigorous limits of pints and penny loaves, that for all that is consumed, so much less remain of the basket and pot. But what is gone out of these is not wasted, but well spent, if it nourish his body and enable him to finish his task, knows all of political economy that the budgets of empires can teach him. The interest of petty economy is the symbolization of the great economy, the way in which a house and a private man's methods tally with the solar system and the laws of give and take through nature, and however wary we are of the falsehoods and petty tricks that we suicidally play off in each other, every man has a certain satisfaction whenever his dealings touches on the inevitable facts. when he sees that things dictate the price, as they always tend to do, and in large manufacturers are seen to do. Your paper is not fine or coarse enough, it is too heavy or too thin. The manufacturer says he will furnish you with that thickness or thinness you want. The pattern is quite indifferent to him. Here is the schedule. Any variety of paper, as cheaper or dearer, with the price annexed. A pound of paper costs so much, and you may have it made up in any pattern you fancy. There is in all our dealings a self-regulation that supersedes chaffering. You will rent a house, you will have it cheap. The owner can reduce the rent, so he incapacitates himself from making proper repairs, and the tenant gets not the house he would have, but a worse one. Besides, that a relation a little injurious is establishing between landlord and tenant. You dismiss your labor, saying, Patrick, I shall send you as soon as I cannot do without you. Patrick goes off contented, for he knows that the weeds will grow with the potatoes. The vines must be planted next year, and however unwilling you may be, the cantaloupes, crooknecks, and cucumbers will send for him. Who but must wish that all labor and value should stand on the same simple and surly market? If it is not the best of its kind, it will. We must have joiner, locksmith, planter, priest, poet, doctor, cook, weaver, ostler, each in turn throughout the year. If a St. Michael's pear sells for a shilling, it costs a shilling to raise it. If in Boston the best securities offer 12% for money, they have just 6% of it in security. You may not see that the fine pear costs you a shilling, but it costs the community so much. The shilling represents the number of enemies the pear has, and the amount of risk in ripening it. The price of coal shows the narrowness of the coal field, and a compulsory confinement to the miners to a certain district. All salaries are reckoned on contingent, as well as on actual services. If the winds were always southwest by west, said the skipper, women might take ships to sea. One might say that all things are of one price, that nothing is cheap or dear, and that the apparent disparities that strike us are only a shopman's trick of concealing the damage in your bargain. A youth coming into the city from his native New Hampshire farm, with his hard fare still fresh in his remembrance, boards at a first-class hotel and believes he must somehow have outwitted Dr. Franklin and Malthus, for luxuries are cheap. It pays for the one convenience of a better dinner by the loss of some of the richest social and educational advantages. He has lost what guards, what incentives. He will perhaps find by and by that he finds the muses at the door of the hotel, and finds the furies inside. Money often costs too much, and power and pleasure are not cheap. The ancient poet said, the gods sell things at a fair price. There is an example of the compensations in the commercial history of the country. When the European wars threw the carrying trade of the world from 1800 to 1812 into American bottoms, a seizure was now and then made of an American ship. Of course the loss was serious to the owner, but the country was indemnified. We charged 3 pence a pound for carrying cotton, 6 pence for tobacco, and so on, which paid for the risks and loss, and brought into the country an immense prosperity, early marriages, private wealth, and the building of cities and of states. And after the war was over, we received compensation over and above by treaty for all the seizures. Well, the Americans grew rich and great, but the payday comes round. Britain, France, and Germany, which our extraordinary profits have impoverished, send out, attracted by the fame of our advantages, first their thousands, then their millions of poor people to share the crop. At first we employ them and increase our prosperity, but in the artificial system of society and of protected labor, which we also have adopted and enlarged, there comes presently checks and stoppages. Then we refuse to employ these poor men, but they will not be so answered. They go into the poor rates, and, though we refuse wages, we must now pay the same amount in the form of taxes. Again, it turns out that the largest proportion of crimes are committed by foreigners. The costs of the crimes and the expenses of the courts and of prisons we must bear, and the standing army of preventative police we must pay. The cost of education of the posterity of this great colony I will not compute, but the gross amount of these costs will begin to pay back what we thought was a net gain from our transatlantic customers of 1800. It is vain to refuse this payment. We cannot get rid of these people, and we cannot get rid of their will to be supported. That has become an inevitable element of our politics, and for their votes, each of the dominant parties courts in a system to get it executed. Moreover, we have to pay not what have contented them at home, but what they have learned to think necessary here, so that opinion, fancy, and all manner of moral considerations complicate the problem. There are a few measures of economy which will bear to be named without disgust. Where the subject is tender, we may easily have too much of it, and therein resembles the hideous animalcules of which our bodies are built up, which, offensive in the particular, yet compose valuable and effective masses. Our nature and genius force us to respect ends, whilst we use means. We must use the means, and yet, in our most accurate using, somehow screen and cloak them, as we can only give them any beauty by reflection of the glory of the ends. That is the good head, which serves the end, and commands the means. The rabble are corrupted by their means. The means are too strong for them, and they desert their end. 1. The first of these measures is that each man's expense must proceed from his character. As long as your genius buys, the investment is safe, though you spend like a monarch. Nature arms each man with some faculty which enables him to do easily some feat impossible to any other, and thus makes him necessary to society. This native determination guides his labor and his spending. He wants an equipment of means and tools proper to his talent, and to save on this point were to neutralize the special strength and helpfulness of his mind. Do your work, respecting the excellence of the work, and not its acceptableness. This is so much economy that, rightly read, is the sum of economy. Profligacy consists not in spending years of time or chests of money, but in spending them off the line of your career. The crime which bankrupts men and states is job work, declining from your main design to serve a turn here or there. Nothing is beneath you if it is in the direction of your life. Nothing is great or desirable if it is off from that. I think we are entitled here to draw a straight line and say that society can never prosper, but must always be bankrupt, until every man does that which he was created to do. Spend for your expense, and retrench the expense which is not yours. Alston the painter was wont to say that he built a plain house and filled it with plain furniture because he would hold out no bribe for any to visit him who had not similar taste to his own. We are sympathetic, and like children want everything we see, but it is a large stride to independence when a man in his discovery of his proper talent has sunk the necessity for false expenses. As a betrothed maiden, by one secured affection, is relieved from a system of slaveries, the daily inculcated necessity of pleasing all, so the man who has found what he can do can spend on that and leave all other spending. Montaigne said, when he was a younger brother, he went brave in dress and equipage, but afterwards his chateau and farms might answer for him. Let a man who belongs to the class of nobles, those namely who have found out that they can do something, relieve themselves of all vague squandering on objects not his. Let the realist not mind appearances. Let him delegate to others the costly courtesies and decorations of social life. The virtues are economists, but some of the vices are also. Thus, next to humility, I have noticed that pride is a pretty good husband. A good pride is, as I reckon it, worth from 500 to 1,500 a year. Pride is handsome, economical. Pride eradicates so many vices, letting none subsist but itself, that it seems as if it were a great gain to exchange vanity for pride. Pride can go without domestics, without fine clothes, can live in a house with 2 rooms, can eat potato, purslane, beans, lied corn, can work on the soil, can travel afoot, can talk with poor men, or sit silent, well contented in fine saloons. But vanity costs money, labor, horses, men, women, health, and peace, and still is nothing at last, a long way leading nowhere. Only one drawback: proud people are intolerably selfish, and the vain are gentle in giving. Art is a jealous mistress, and if a man have a genius for painting, poetry, music, architecture, or philosophy, he makes a bad husband and an ill provider, and should be wise in season, not fetter himself with duties which will embitter his days and spoil him for his proper work. We had in this region, 20 years ago, among our educated men, a sort of Arcadian fanaticism, a passionate desire to go upon the land, and unite farming to the intellectual pursuits. Many effected their purpose, and made the experiment, and some became downright plowmen, but all were cured of their faith that scholarship and practical farming, I mean with one's own hands, could be united. With brow bent, with firm intent, the pale scholar leaves his desk to draw a freer breath, and get a juster statement of his thoughts in a garden walk. He stoops to pull at a purslane or a dock that is choking in the young corn, and finds there are 2. Close behind the last is a 3rd. He reaches out his hand to a 4th. Behind that there are 4,001. He is heated and untuned, and by wakes up from his idiot dream of chickweed and redroot, to remember his morning thought, and to find that, with his adamantine purposes, he has been duped by a dandelion. A garden is like those pernicious machineries we read of every month in the newspapers, which catch a man's coat skirt or his hand, and draw on his arm, his leg, and his whole body to irresistible destruction. In an evil hour he has pulled down his wall, and added a field to his homestead. No land is bad, but land is worse. If a man own land, the land owns him. Now let him leave home if he dare. Every tree and graft, every hill of melons, row of corn, or quickest hedge, all he has done, and all he means to do, stand in the way, like duns, and he would go out of his gate. The devotion of these vines and trees he finds poisonous. Long free walks, a circuit of miles, free his brain and serve his body. Long marches are no hardship to him. He believes he composes easily on the hills, but this powdering in a few square yards of garden is dispiriting and driveling. The smell of the plants has drugged him, and robbed him of his energy. He finds a catalepsy in his bones. He grows peevish and poor-spirited. The genius of reading and gardening are antagonistic, like resonance and vitreous electricity. One is concentrative in sparks and shocks, the other is diffuse strength, so that each disqualifies its workman for the other's duties. An engraver, whose hands must be an exquisite delicacy of stroke, should not lay stone walls. Sir David Brewster gives exact instructions for microscopic observation. Lie down on your back, and hold the single lensed object over your eyes, etc., etc. How much more the seeker of abstract truth, who needs periods of isolation, and rapt concentration, and almost a going out of body to think. 2. Spend after your genius and by system. Nature goes by rule, not by sallies and saltations. There must be system in the economies. Saving and unexpensiveness will not keep the most pathetic family from ruin, nor will bigger incomes make the free spending safe. The secret of success is never in the amount of money, but in the relation of income to outgo. As if, after expense has been fixed at a certain point, then new and steadily rills of income, though never so small, being added, wealth begins. But in ordinary, as means increase, spending increases faster, so that large incomes in England and elsewhere are found not to help matters. The eating quality of debt does not relax its veracity. When the cholera is in the potato, what is the use of planting large crops? In England, the richest country in the world, I was assured by shrewd observers that the great lords and ladies have no more guineas to give away than other people. That liberality with money is as rare and as immediately famous a virtue as it is here. Want is a growing giant, which the coat of have was never large enough to cover. I remember in Warwickshire to have been shown a fair manor, still in the same name as in Shakespeare's time. The rent roll, I was told, is some £14,000 a year, but when the second son of the late proprietor was born, the father was perplexed how to provide for him. The eldest son must inherit the manor. What to do with this supernumerary? He was advised to breed him for the church, and to settle him in the rectorship, which was in the gift of the family, which was done. It was a general rule in that country, the bigger the incomes do not help anybody. It is commonly observed that a sudden wealth, like a prize drawn on a lottery, or a large bequest to a poor family, does not permanently enrich. They have served no apprenticeship to wealth, and with rapid wealth comes rapid claims, which they do not know how to deny, and the treasure is quickly dissipated. A system must be in every economy, or the best single expedients are of no avail. A farm is a good thing when it begins and ends with itself. It does not need a salary, or a shop, to eke it out. Thus the cattle are a main link in the chain ring. If the nonconformist or aesthetic farmer leaves out the cattle, and does not also leave out the want which the cattle must supply, he must fill the gap by begging or stealing. When men now alive were born, the farm yielded everything that was consumed on it. The farm yielded no money, and the farmer got on without it. If he fell sick, his neighbors came to his aid. Each gave a day's work, or a half a day, or lent his yoke of oxen, or a horse, or kept his work even. Hoed his potato, mowed his hay, reaped his rye, well knowing that no man could afford to hire labor without selling his land. In autumn a farmer could sell an ox or a hog, and get a little money to pay taxes withal. Now the farmer buys almost all he consumes: tinware, cloth, sugar, tea, coffee, fish, coal, railroad tickets, and newspapers. A master in each art is required, because the practice is never with still or dead subjects, but with change in your hands. You think farm buildings and broad acres a solid property, but its value is flowing like water. It requires as much watching as if you were decanting wine from a cask. The farmer knows what to do with it, stops every leak, turns all the seamless into one reservoir, and decants wine, but a blunderhead comes out of Cornhill, tries his hand, and it all leaks away. So it is with granite sheets, or timber townships, or the fruit of flowers. Nor is any investment so permanent that it can be allowed to remain without incessant watching, as the history of each attempt to lock up an inheritance through 2 generations for an unborn inheritor may show. When Mr. Cockayne takes a cottage in the country and will keep his cows, he thinks the cow is a creature that is fed on hay, and gives a pail of milk twice a day. But the cow that he buys gives milk for 3 months, then her bag dries up. What to do with a dry cow? Who will buy her? Perhaps he bought also a yoke of oxen to do his work, but they get blown and lame. What to do with the blown and lame oxen? The farmer fats his, and after the spring work is done, he kills them in the fall. But how can Cockayne, who has no pastures, and leaves his cottage daily in the cars, at business hours, be bothered with fattening and killing oxen? He plants trees, but there must be crops, to keep the trees in plowed land. What shall be the crops? He will have nothing to do with trees, but will have grass. After a year or 2, the grass must be turned up and plowed. Now what crops? Credulous Cockayne. 3. Help comes in the custom of the country, and the rules of impera operando. The rule is not to dictate, not to insist on carrying out each of your schemes by ignorant willfulness, but to learn practically the secret spoken from all nature, that things themselves will refuse to be mismanaged, and will show to the watchful their own law. Nobody needs stir hand or foot. The custom of the country will do it all. I know not how to build or to plant, neither how to buy wood, nor what to do with the house lot, the field, the wood lot, when bought. Never fear. It is all settled how it shall be, long beforehand, in the customs of the country, whether to sand, or whether to clay it, when to plow, and how to dress, whether to grass, how to corn, and you cannot help or hinder it. Nature has her own best mode of doing each thing, and she has somewhere told it plainly, if we will keep our eyes and ears open. If not, she will not be slow in undeceiving us, when we prefer our own ways to hers. How often we must remember the art of the surgeon, which, in replacing a broken bone, contents itself with releasing the parts from false position. They fall into their place by the action of the muscles. On this art of nature all the arts rely. Of the two eminent engineers in the recent construction of railroads in England, Mr. Bruno went straight from terminus to terminus, through mountains, over streams, crossing highways, cutting ducal estates in two, and shooting through this man's cellar and that man's attic window, and so arriving at his end at great pleasures to geometers, but with costs to his company. Mr. Stevenson, on the contrary, believed that the river knows the way, followed his valley as implicitly as our Western Railroad follows the Westfield River, and turned out to be the safest and cheapest engineer. We say the cows laid out Boston. Well, there are worse surveyors. Every pedestrian in our pastures has frequent occasion to thank the cows for cutting the best path through the thicket and over the hills, and travelers Indians know the value of Buffalo Trail, which is sure to be the easiest possible pass through the ridge. When a citizen, fresh from Dockshire or Milk Street, comes out and buys land in this country, his first thought is to look at the outlook from his windows. His library must command a western view, a sunset every day, bathing his shoulder of blue hills, Wachusett, and the peaks of Monadnock and Encoonach. What, 30 acres and all this magnificence for $15,000? It would be cheap at $50,000. He proceeds at once, his dim eyes with tears of joy, to fix the spot for his cornerstone. But the man who is to his level on the ground thinks it will take many hundred loads of gravel to fill the hollow of the road. The stonemason who should build the wells thinks he should have to dig 40 feet. The baker doubts he shall never like to drive up to the door. The practical neighbor cavils at the position of the farm, and the citizen comes to know that his predecessor farmer built the house on the right spot for the sun and wind, the spring, the water drainage, and the convenience to the pasture, the garden, the field, and the road. So Dock Square yields the point, and things have their own way. Use has made the farmer wise, and the foolish citizen learns to take his counsel. From step to step he comes at last to surrender his discretion. The farmer affects to take his commands, but the citizen says, "You may ask me as often as you will, and in what ingenious forms, for an opinion concerning the mode of building my wall, or sinking my well, or laying out my acre, but the ball will rebound to you. There are matters in which I neither know nor need to know anything. They are questions which you and not I shall answer." Not less, within doors, a system settles itself paramount and tyrannical over masters and mistress, servant and child, cousin and acquaintance. 'Tis in vain that genius or virtue or energy of character strive to cry against it. This is fate. And 'tis very well that the poor husband reads in a book of a new way of living, and resolves to adapt it at home. Let him go home and try it, if he dare. 4. Another point of economy is to look for seed of the same kind that you sow, and not to hope to buy one kind with another. Friendship buys friendship, justice justice, military merit, military success. Good husbandry finds wife, children, and household. The good merchant large gains, ships, stocks, and money. The good poet fame and literary credit, but not either or the other. Yet there is commonly a confusion of expectations on these points. Hotspur lives for the moment, praises himself for it, and despises Furlong that he does not. Hotspur, of course, is poor, and Furlong a good provider. The odd circumstance is that Hotspur thinks it a superiority in himself, this improvidence, which ought to be rewarded with Furlong's lands. I have not at all completed my design, but we shall not leave the topic without casting one glance at the interior recesses. It is a doctrine of philosophy that man is a being of degrees, that there is nothing in the world which is not repeated in his body being a sort of miniature or summary of the world. Then that there is nothing in his body which is not repeated in the celestial spheres in his mind. Then there is nothing in his brain which is not repeated in a higher sphere in his moral system. 5. Now these things are so in nature. All things ascend, and the royal rule of economy is that it should ascend also, or whatever we do must also have a higher aim. Thus it is a maxim, that money is another kind of blood, pecuniaire alter sanguinis, or the estate of man is only a larger kind of body, and admits of regimen analogous to his bodily circulations. So there is no maxim of the merchant, example given, best use of money is to pay debts, every business by itself, best time is the present time, the right investment is tools for your trade, or the like which does not admit of an extended sense. The conning room maxims liberally expound our laws of the universe. The merchant's economy is a coarse symbol for the soul's economy. It is to spend for power and not for pleasure. It is to invest income, that is to say, to take up particulars into generals, days into integral eras, literary, emotive, practical of its life, and still to ascend in its investment. The merchant has but one rule, absorb and invest. He is to be a capitalist. The scraps and filings must be gathered back in the crucible, the gas and smoke must be burned, and earnings must not go to increase expense, but to capital again. Well, the man must be a capitalist. Will he spend his income or will he invest? His body and every organ is under the same law. His body is a jar, in which the liquor of life is stored. Will he spend for pleasure? The way to ruin is short and facile. Will he not spend, but hoard for power? It passes through the sacred fermentations, by that law of nature whereby everything climbs to higher platforms, and bodily vigor becomes mental and moral vigor. The bread he eats is first strength and animal spirits. It becomes in higher laboratories imagery and thought, and in still higher results courage and endurance. This is the right compound interest. This is capital double, quadrupled, centupled. Man raised to his highest power. The true thrift is always to spend on a higher plane, to invest, and invest with keener avarice that he may spend in spiritual creation, not in augmenting animal existence. Nor is the man enriched in repeating the old experiments of animal sensation, nor unless through the new powers of ascending pleasures he knows himself by the actual experience of higher good to be already on his way to the highest. End of Wealth. Culture. Essay 4 of Conduct of Life. Culture. Can rules or tutors educate the semi-god whom we await? We must be musical, tremulous, impressional, alive to gentle influence of landscape and of sky, and tender to the spirit touch of man or maiden's eye, but to his native center fast shall into future fuse the past, and the world's flowing fates in his world mold recast. The word of ambition at the present day is culture. Whilst all the world is in pursuit of power, and of wealth as a means of power, culture corrects the theory of success. A man is the prisoner of his power. A topical memory makes him an almanac, a talent for debate a disputant. Skill to get money makes him a miser, that is, a beggar. Culture reduces these inflammations by invoking the aid of other powers against the dominant talent, and by appealing to the rank of powers. It watches success. For performance, nature has no mercy, and sacrifices the performer to get it done. Makes a dropsy or a timpani of him. If she wants a thumb, she makes one at the cost of arms and legs, and any excessive power in one part is usually paid for by some defect in a contiguous part. Our efficiency depends so much on our concentration that nature usually, in the instances where a marked man is sent onto the world, overloads him with a bias, sacrificing his symmetry to his working power. It is said, "No man can write but one book," and if a man have a defect, it is apt to leave its impression on all its performances. If she creates a policeman like Fouché, he is made up of suspicions and of plots to circumvent them. The air, said Fouché, is full of poniards. The physician Sanctorius spent his life in a pair of scales, weighing his food. Lord Coke valued Chaucer highly, because of the Canon Yemen's tale that illustrates the statute Henry V, chapter 4, against alchemy. I saw a man who believed the principal mischiefs of the English state were derived from the devotion to musical concerts. A Freemason, not long since, set out to explain to this country that the principal cause of the success of General Washington was the aid he derived from the Freemasons. But worse than harping on one string, nature has secured individualism by giving the private person a high conceit of his way in the system. The pest of society is egotists. They are dull and bright, sacred and profane, coarse and fine egotists. 'Tis a disease like influenza, falls on all constitutions. In the distemper known to physicians as chorea, the patient sometimes turns around and continues to spin slowly in one spot. Is egotism a metaphysical varioloid of this malady? The man runs round a ring formed by his own talent, falls into admiration of it, and loses relation to the world. It is a tendency in all minds. One of its knowing forms is a craving for sympathy. The sufferers parade their miseries, tear the lint from the bruises, reveal their indictable crimes, that you may pity them. They like sickness, because physical pain will extort some show of interest from the bystanders, as we have seen children who, finding themselves of no account when grown-ups come in, will cough till they choke to draw attention. This distemper is the scourge of talent, of artists, inventors, and philosophers. Eminent spiritualists shall have an incapacity of putting their act or word aloof from them, and seeing it bravely for the nothing it is. Beware of the man who says, "I am on the eve of a revelation." It is speedily punished, inasmuch as this habit invites men to humor it, and by treating the patient tenderly, to shut him up in narrow selfism, and exclude him from the great works of God's cheerful, fallible men and women. Let's rather be insulted while we are insultable. Religious literature has eminent examples, and if we run over our private list of poets, critics, philanthropists, and philosophers, we shall find them infected with this dropsy and elephantiasis, which we ought to have tapped. This goiter of egotism is so frequent among notable persons that we must infer some strong necessity in nature which it subserves, such as we see in the sexual attraction. The preservation of the species was a point of such necessity that nature has secured it at all hazards by immensely overloading the passion, at the risk of perpetual crime and disorder. So egotism has its root in the cardinal necessity by which each individual persists to be what he is. This individuality is not only not inconsistent with culture, but is the basis of it. Every valuable nature is there in its own right, and the student we speak to must have a mother wit invincible by his culture, which uses all books, arts, facilities, and elegance of intercourse, but is never subdued and lost in them. He only is a well-made man who has a good determination. And the end of all culture is not to destroy this, God forbid, but to train away all impediment and mixture, and leave nothing but power. Our student must have a style and determination, and be a master of his own specialty. But having this, he must put it behind him. He must have a catholicity, a power to see with a free and disengaged look at every object. Yet is his private interest in self so overcharged that, if a man seek a companion who can look at an object for their own sake, and without affectation or self-reference, he will find the fewest who will give him that satisfaction. Whilst most men are afflicted with a coldness and incuriosity as soon as any object does not connect with their self-love. Though they talk of the object before them, they are thinking of themselves, and their vanity is laying little traps for your admiration. But after a man has discovered that there are limits to the interest which his private history has for mankind, he still converses with his family, or a few companions, perhaps with a half-dozen personalities that are famous in his neighborhood. In Boston, the question of life is the names of some 8 or 10 men. Have you seen Mr. Allison, Dr. Channing, Mr. Adams, Mr. Webster, Mr. Greenbow? Have you heard of Everett, Garrison, Father Taylor, Theodore Parker? Have you talked with Monsieur Turbanwheel, Summit Level, and La Croix? Then you may as well die. In New York, the question is some 8 or 10 or 20. Have you seen a few lawyers, merchants, and brokers? 2 or 3 scholars? 2 or 3 capitalists? 2 or 3 editors of newspapers? New York is a sucked orange. All conversation is at an end when you have discharged yourselves of a dozen personalities, domestic or imported, which make up our American existence. Nor do we expect anybody to be other than a faint copy of these heroes. Life is very narrow. Bring any club or company of intelligent men together after 10 years, and if the presence of some penetrating and calming genius could dispose them to frankness, what a confession of insanities would come up! The causes which we have sacrificed, terror for democracy, Whiggism or abolition, temperance and socialism, would show like roots of bitterness and dragon's wrath. And our talents are as mischievous as if they had been seized upon by some bird of prey, which had whisked him away from fortune, from truth, from the dear society of the poets, some zeal, some bias, and only when he is now grey and nerveless was it relaxing its claws, and he awakening to sober perceptions. Culture is the suggestion from certain best thoughts that a man has a range of affinities, through which he can modulate the violence of any master tones that have a droning preponderance on a scale, and succour him against himself. Culture redresses his balance, puts him among his equals and superiors, revives his delicious sense of sympathy, and warns him of the danger of solitude and repulsion. 'Tis not a compliment but a disparagement to consult a man only on horses, or on steam, or on theatres, or on eating, or on books, and, whenever he appears, considerately to turn the conversation to the bantling he is known to fondle. In the Norse heaven of our forefathers, Thor's house had 540 floors. A man's house has 540 floors. His excellence is facility of adaptation and of transition through many related points, to wide contrasts and extremes. Culture kills his exaggeration, his conceit of his village or his city. We must leave our pets at home when we go into the street, and meet men on broad grounds of good meaning and good sense. No performance is worth loss of geniality. 'Tis a cruel price we pay for certain fancy goods called fine art and philosophy. In the Norse legend, Allfather did not get a drink from Mimir's spring, the fountain of wisdom, until he left his eye in pledge. And here is a pedant that cannot unfold his wrinkles, nor conceal his wrath at interruption by the best, if their conversation not fit his impertinency. Here is he to afflict us with his personalities. 'Tis incident to scholars that each of them fancies he is pointedly odious in his community. Draw him out of his limbo of irritability. Cleanse with healthy blood his parchment skin. You restore to him the eye which you left in pledge of Mimir's spring. If you are the victim of your doing, who cares what you do? We can spare your opera, your gazetteer, your chemic analysis, your history, your syllogisms. Your man of genius pays dear for his distinction. His head runs into a spire, and instead of a healthy man, merry and wise, he is some mad dominie. Nature is reckless of the individual. When she has points to carry, she carries them. To wade in marshes and sea margins is the destiny of certain birds, and they are so accurately made for this that they are imprisoned in those places. Each animal out of its habitat would starve. To the physician, each man, each woman is an application of one organ. A soldier, a locksmith, a bank clerk, and a dancer could not exchange functions, and thus we are victims of our adaptation. The antidotes against this organic egotism are the range and variety of attractions, as gained by acquaintance with the world, with men of merit, with classes of society, with travel, with eminent persons, and with the high resources of philosophy, art, and religion. Books, travel, society, solitude. The hardiest skeptic who has ever seen a horse broken, a pointer trained, or has visited a menagerie, or the exhibition of the industrious fleas, will not deny the validity of education. A boy, said Plato, is the most vicious of all wild beasts. In the same spirit, the old English poet Gascoigne said, "A boy is better unborn than untaught." The city breeds one kind of speech and manners, the back country a different style, the sea another, the army a fourth. We know that an army which can be confided in may be formed by discipline, that by systematic discipline all men may be made heroes. Marshal Lannes said to the French officer, "Know, Colonel, that none but a poltroon would boast he never was afraid." A great part of courage is the courage of having done the thing before. And in all human action, those faculties will be strong which are used. Robert Owen said, "Give me a tiger and I will educate him." 'Tis inhuman to want faith in the power of education, since to ameliorate is the law of nature, and men are valued precisely as they exert onward or ameliorating force. On the other hand, poltroonery is the acknowledging of an inferiority to be incurable. Incapacity or amelioration is the only mortal distemper. There are people who can never understand a trope, or any second or expanded sense given to your words, or any humor, but remain literalists after hearing the music and poetry and rhetoric and wit of 70 or 80 years. They are past the help of surgeon or clergy. But even these can understand pitchforks and the cry of fire. I have noticed in some of this class a marked dislike of earthquakes. Let us make our education brave and preventative. Politics is an afterwork, a poor patching. We are always a little late. The evil is done, the law is passed. We begin the uphill agitation for repeal of that which we ought to have prevented the enacting. We shall one day learn to supersede politics by education. What we call our root and branch reforms of slavery, war, gambling, and temperance is only medicating the symptoms. We must begin higher up, namely, in education. Arts and tools give to him who can handle them much the same advantage over the novice, as if you extended his life 10, 50, or 100 years. And I think it the part of every good sense to provide every fine soul with such culture that it shall not, at 30 or 40 years, have to say, "This which I might do is made hopeless through my want of weapons." But it is conceded that much of our training fails of effect, that all success is hazardous and rare, that a large part of our cost and pains is thrown away. Nature takes the matter into her own hands, and, though we must not omit any jot of our system, we can seldom be sure that it has availed much, or that as much good would not have accrued from a different system. Books, as containing the finest records of human wit, must always enter into our notion of culture. The best heads that ever existed, Pericles, Plato, Julius Caesar, Shakespeare, Goethe, Milton, were well-read, universally educated men, and quite too wise to undervalue letters. Their opinion has weight, because they had means of knowing the opposite opinion. We look that a great man should be a good reader, or in proportion to the spontaneous power should be the assimilating power. Good criticism is very rare, and always precious. I am always happy to meet persons who perceive the transcendent superiority of Shakespeare over all writers. I like people who like Plato, because this love does not consist with self-conceit. But books are good only as far as a boy is ready for them. He sometimes gets ready very slowly. You send your child to schoolmaster, but 'tis schoolboys who educate him. You send him to the Latin class, but much of his tuition comes on his way to school, from the shop windows. You like the strict rules and long terms, but he finds his best leading in a byway of his own, and refuses any companions but of his choosing. He hates the grammar and gratus, and loves guns, fishing rods, horses, and boats. Well, the boy is right, and you are not fit to direct his upbringing if your theory leaves out his gymnastic training. Archery, cricket, gun, and fishing rod, horse and boat are all educators, liberalizers, and so are dancing, dress, and street talk, and, provided only the boy has resources and is of noble and ingenious strain, these will not serve him less than the books. He learns chess, whist, dancing, and theatricals. The father observes that another boy has learned algebra and geometry in the same time, but the first boy has acquired much more than these poor games along with them. He is infatuated for weeks with whist and chess, but presently will find out, as you did, that when he rises from the game too long played, he is vacant and forlorn, and despises himself. Thenceforth it takes place among other things, and has its due weight in its experience. These minor skills and accomplishments, for example, dancing, are tickets of admission to the dress circle of mankind, and the being master of them enables the youth to judge intelligently of such, on which otherwise he would have a pedantic squint. Landor said, "I have suffered more from my bad dancing than from all the misfortunes and miseries of my life put together." Provided always the boy is teachable, for we are not proposing to make a statue out of punk. Football, cricket, archery, swimming, skating, climbing, fencing, dancing are lessons of the art of power, which it is his main business to learn. Riding especially, of which Lord Herbert of Cherbury said, "A good rider on a good horse is as much above himself and others as the world can make him." Besides, the gun, fishing rod, boat, and horse constitute, among those who use them, secret Freemasonries. They are as if they belonged to one club. There is also a negative value in these arts. Their chief use to the youth is not amusement, but to be known for what they are, and not to be remain to him occasions of heartburn. We are full of superstitions. Each class fixes its eyes on the advantages it has not, the refined on rude strength, the democrat on birth and breeding. One of the benefits of a college education is to show the boy of its little avail. I knew a leading man in a leading city who, having set his heart on education at the university, and missed it, could never quite feel himself the equal of his own brothers who had gone thither. His easy superiority to multitudes of professional men could never quite countervail him of this imaginary defect. Balls, riding, wine parties, and billiards pass to a poor boy for something fine and romantic, which they are not, and a free admission to them on equal footing, if it were possible, only once or twice, would be worth 10 times its cost, by undeceiving him. I am not much an advocate for traveling, and I observe that men run away from their countries because they are not good in their own, or run back to their own because they pass for nothing in the new places. For the most part, only the light characters travel. Or you that have no task to keep you at home. I have been quoted as saying captious things about travel, but I mean to do justice. I think there is a restlessness in our people which argues want of character. All educated Americans, first or last, go to Europe. Perhaps because it is their mental home, as the invalid habits of this country might suggest. An eminent teacher of girls said, "The idea of a girl's education is whatever qualifies them for going to Europe." Can we never extract this tapeworm of Europe from the brain of our countrymen? One sees very well what their fate must be. He that does not fill a place at home cannot abroad. He only goes there to hide his insignificance in a larger crowd. You do not think you will find anything there which you do not see at home. The stuff of all countries is just the same. Do you suppose there is any country where they do not scald milk pans, and swaddle the infants, and burn the brushwood, and broil the fish? What is true anywhere is true everywhere. And let him go where he will, he can only find so much beauty or worth as he carries. Of course, for some men, travel may be useful. Naturalists, discoverers, and sailors are born. Some men are made for couriers, exchangers, envoys, missionaries, bearers of dispatches, as others are for farmers or working men. And if the man is of light and social turn, and nature has aimed to make a legged and winged creature framed for locomotion, then we must follow his hint, and furnish him with that breeding which gives currency, as sedulously as with that which gives worth. Let us not be pedantic, but allow it to travel its full effect. The boy grown up on the farm, which he has never left, is said in the country to have had no chance, and boys and men of that condition look upon work on a railroad or drudgery in a city as opportunity. Poor country boys of Vermont, Connecticut, formerly owed that knowledge they had to the peddling trips of the southern states. California on the Pacific coast is now a university of this class, as Virginia was in old times. To have some chance is their word, and the phrase to know the world, or to travel, is synonymous with all men's ideas of advantage and superiority. No doubt, to a man of sense, travel offers advantages. As many languages as he has, as many friends, as many arts and trades, as many times is he a man. A foreign country is a point of comparison, wherefrom to judge his own. One use of travel is to recommend the books and works of home. We go to Europe to be Americanized, and another to find men. For as nature has put fruits apart in latitudes, a new fruit in every degree, so knowledge and fine moral qualities she lodges in distant men, and thus of the 6 or 7 teachers whom each man wants among his contemporaries, it often happens that 1 or 2 of them live on the other side of the world. Moreover, there is in every constitution a certain solstice, where the stars stand still in our inward firmament, and when there is required some foreign force, some diversion or alternative to prevent stagnation, and as a medical remedy, travel seems one of the best. Just as a man witnessing the admirable effect of ether to lull pain, and meditating on the contingencies of wounds, cancers, lockjaws, rejoices in Dr. Jackson's benign discovery, so a man who looks at Paris, at Naples, at London, says, "If I should be driven from my own home, here, at least, my thoughts can be consoled by the most prodigal amusements and occupation which the human race in ages could contrive and accumulate." Akin to the benefit of foreign travel, the aesthetic value of railroads is to unite the advantages in town of country life, neither of which we can spare. A man should live in or near a large town, because, let his own genius be what it may, it will repel quite as much of agreeable and valuable talent as it draws, and, in a city, a total attraction of all citizens is sure to conquer, first or last, every repulsion, and drag the most improbable hermit within its walls some day of the year. In town he can find the swimming pool, the gymnasium, the dancing master, the shooting gallery, opera, theater, and panorama, the chemist's shop, the museum of natural history, the gallery of fine arts, the national orators, in their turn, foreign travelers, the libraries, and his club. In the country he can find solitude in reading, manly labor, cheap living, and his old shoes, woods for games, hills for geology, and groves for devotion. Aubrey writes, I have heard Thomas Hobbes say that, in the Earl of Devon's house in Derbyshire, there was a good library and books enough for him, and his lordship stored the library with what books he thought fit to be bought. But the want of good conversation was a great inconvenience, and though he conceived he could order his thinking as well as another, yet he found a great defect. In the country, in a long time, for want of good conversation, was understanding and invention contracting moss on them, like an old paling in an orchard. Cities give us collision. 'Tis said, London and New York take the nonsense out of a man. A great part of our education is sympathetic and social. Boys and girls who have been brought up in well-informed and superior people show in their manners an inestimable grace. Fuller said that William Earl of Nassau won a subject for the King of Spain every time he put off his hat. You cannot have one well-bred man without a whole society of such. They keep each other up to any high point, especially women. It requires a great many cultivated women, saloons of bright, elegant, reading women, accustomed to ease and refinement, to spectacles, pictures, sculpture, poetry, and to elegant society, in order that you should have one Madame de Staël. The head of a commercial house, or a leading lawyer or politician is brought into daily contact with troops of men from all parts of the country, and those too have the driving wheels, the business men of each section, and one can hardly suggest for a more apprehensive man a more searching culture. Besides, we must remember the high social possibilities of a million of men. The best bribe which London offers today to the imagination is that, in such a vast variety of people and conditions, one can believe that there is room for persons of romantic character to exist, that the poet, the mystic, and the hero may hope to confront their counterparts. I wish cities could teach the best lesson of quiet manners. It is a foible, especially of American youth, pretension. The work of the man of the world is absence of pretension. He does not make a speech. He takes a low business tone, avoids all brag, is nobody, dresses plainly, promises not at all, prefers much, speaks in monosyllables, hugs his facts. He calls his employment by its lowest name, and so takes from evil tongues their sharpest weapon. His conversation clings to weather and the news, yet he allows himself to be surprised in a thought, in the unlocking of his learning and philosophy. How the imagination is piqued by anecdotes of great men passing incognito, as a king in grey clothes, of Napoleon affecting a plain suit at his glittering levee, of Burns, of Scott, of Beethoven, of Wellington, of Goethe, or any container of transcendent power passing for nobody. Of Epaminondas, who never says anything but will listen eternally, of Goethe, who preferred trifling subjects and common expressions in intercourse with strangers, worse rather than better clothes, and to appear a little more capricious than he was. There are advantages in the old hat and box coat. I have heard that, throughout this country, a certain respect is paid to good broadcloth, but dress makes a little restraint. Men will not commit themselves. But the box coat is like wine, it unlocks the tongue, and men say what they think. An old poet said, Go far and go sparing, and you'll find it certain. The poorer and the baser you appear, the more you look through still. Not much otherwise Milnes writes, in the Lay of the Humble, To me men are for what they are, they wear no masks with me. 'Tis odd that a people should have, not water on the brain, but a little gas there. A shrewd foreigner said of the Americans that whatever they say has a little the air of a speech. Yet one of the traits down in the books as distinguishing the Anglo-Saxon is the trick of self-disparagement. To be sure, in old dense countries, among a million of good coats, a fine coat comes to be of no distinction, and you find humorists. In an English party, a man with no marked manners features, with a face like red dough, unexpectedly discloses wit, learning, a wide range of topics, and personal familiarity with good men in all parts of the world, until you think you have fallen upon some illustrious personage. Can it be that the American forest has refreshed some weeds of old pietish barbarism just ready to die out? The love of the scarlet feather, of beads and tinsel? The Italians are fond of red clothes, peacock plumes, and embroidery, and I remember one rainy morning in the city of Palermo. The street was in a blaze with scarlet umbrellas. The English have a plain taste. The equipages of the grandees are plain. A gorgeous livery indicates new and awkward city wealth. Mr. Pitt, like Mr. Pym, thought the title of Mr. good against any king in Europe. They have piqued themselves on governing the whole world in a poor, plain, dark committee room, which the House of Commons sat in before the fire. Whilst we want cities as the centres where the best things are found, cities degrade us by magnifying trifles. The countrymen find the town a chop-house, a barber shop. He has lost the lines of grandeur of the horizon, hills and plains, and with them sobriety and elevation. He has come among a supple, glib-tongued tribe who live for show, servile to public opinion. Life is dragged down to a fracas of pitiful cares and disasters. You say the gods ought to respect a life whose objects are their own, but in cities they have betrayed you to a cloud of insignificant annoyances. 'Tis heavy odds against the gods when they will match with myrmidons. We spawning myrmidons. Our turn today, we take command. Jove gives the globe into the hand of myrmidons of myrmidons. What is odious but noise, and people who scream and bewail, people whose vain point always east, who live to dine, who send for the doctor, who coddle themselves, who toast their feet on the register, who intrigue to secure a padded chair and a corner out of the drought. Suffer them once to begin the enumeration of their infirmities, and the sun will not go down on an unfinished tale. Let these triflers put us out of conceit with petty comforts. To a man at work, the frost is but a color. The rain, the wind, he forgot them when he came in. Let us learn to live coarsely, dress plainly, and lie hard. The least habit of dominion over the palate has certain good effects not easily estimated. Neither will we be driven into a quibbling abstemiousness. 'Tis a superstition to insist on a special diet. All is made at last of the same chemical atoms. A man in pursuit of greatness feels no little wants. How can you mind diet, bed, dress, or salads of compliments, or the figure you make in company or wealth, or even the bringing things to pass, when you think how paltry are the machinery of the workers? Wordsworth was praised to me, in Westermoreland, for having afforded to his country neighbors an example of modest household, where comfort and culture were secured without display, and a tender boy who wears his rusty cap and outgrown coat, that he may secure the coveted place in college, and the right in library, is educated to some purpose. There's a great deal of self-denial and manliness in poor and middle-class houses, in town and country, that has not got into literature, and never will, but that keeps the earth sweet. That saves on superfluities, and spends on essentials, that goes rusty, and educates the boy, that sells the horse and builds the school, works early and late, takes 2 looms in the factory, 3 looms, 6 looms, and pays off the mortgage on the paternal farm, and then goes back cheerfully to work again. We can ill spare the commanding social benefits of cities. They must be used, yet cautiously and haughtily, and will yield their best values to him who best can do without them. Keep the town for occasions, but the habit should be formed to retirement. Solitude, the safeguard of mediocrity, is to genius the stern friend, the cold obscure shelter where moult the wings which will bear it farther than suns and stars. He who shall inspire and lead his race must be defended from traveling with the souls of other men, from living, breathing, reading, and writing in the daily, time-worn yoke of their opinions. In the morning, solitude, said Pythagoras, that nature may speak to the imagination, as she never does in company, and that her favorite may make acquaintance with those divine strengths which disclose themselves to serious and abstracted thought. 'Tis very certain that Plato, Plotinus, Archimedes, Hermes, Newton, Milton, Wordsworth did not live in a crowd, but descended into it from time to time as benefactors. And the wise instructor will press the point of securing to the young soul in the disposition of time and the arrangements of living, periods and habits of solitude. The high advantage of university life is often the mere mechanical one, I may call it, of a separate chamber and fire, which parents will allow the boy without hesitation at Cambridge, but do not think needful at home. We say solitude, to mark the character of a tone of thought, but it can be shared between 2 or more than 2. It is happier and not less noble. We 4, wrote Neander to his sacred friends, will enjoy at Hale the inward blessedness of civitas Dea, whose foundations are forever friendship. The more I know you, the more I satisfy and must satisfy all my wonted companions. The very presence stupefies me. The common understanding withdraws itself from one center to all existence. Solitude takes off the pressure of present opportunities that more catholic and humane relations may appear. The saint and poet seek privacy to ends the most public and universal, and it is the secret of culture to interest the man more in his public than in his private quality. Here is a new poem, which elicits a good many comments in the journals and in conversation. From these it is easy, at least, to eliminate the verdict which readers pass upon it, and that is, in the main, unfavorable. The poet, as a craftsman, is only interested in the praise accorded to him, and not in the censure, though it be just. And the poor little poet hearkens only to that, and rejects the censure, as proving incapacity in the critic. But the poet cultivated becomes a stockholder in both companies, say Mr. Curfew, in the curfew stock and in the humanity stock, and the last exalts as much in the demonstration of the unsoundness of curfew, as his interest in the former gives him pleasure in the currency of curfew. For the depreciation of his curfew stock only shows the immense value of the humanity stock. As soon as he sides with his critic against himself, with joy he is a cultivated man. We must have an intellectual quality in all property and all action, or they are not. I must have children, I must have events, I must have a social state and history, or my thinking and speaking want body or basis. But to give these accessories any value, I must know them as contingent and rather showy possessions, which pass for more to the people than to me. See this abstraction in scholars as a matter of course. But what a charm it adds when observed in practical men! Bonaparte, like Caesar, was intellectual, could look at every object for itself without affectation. Though an egotist à l'outrance, he would criticize a play, a building, a character, on universal grounds, and give a just opinion. A man known to us only as a celebrity in politics or in trade gains largely in our esteem if we discover he has some intellectual taste or skill, as when we learn of Lord Fairfax, the Long Parliament's general, his passion for antiquarian studies, or of the French regicide Charnot, his sublime genius in mathematics, or of a living banker, his success in poetry, or of a partisan journalist, his devotion to ornithology. So if in traveling in the dreary wilderness to Arkansas or Texas, we should observe on the next seat a man reading Horace or Martial or Calderon, we should wish to hug him. In callings that require roughest energy, soldiers, sea captains, and civil engineers sometimes betray a fine insight, if only through a certain gentleness when off duty, a good-natured admission that there are illusions, and who shall say that there is not their sport? We only vary the phrase, not the doctrine, when we say that culture opens the sense of beauty. A man is a beggar who only lives to the useful, and, however he may serve as a pin or rivet in the social machine, cannot be said to have arrived at self-possession. I suffer, every day, from the want of perception of beauty in people. They do not know the charm with which all moments and objects can be embellished, the charm of manners, the self-command of benevolence. Repose and cheerfulness are the badge of the gentleman. Repose in energy. The Greek battle pieces are calm. The heroes, in whatever violent action engaged, retain a serene aspect, as we say of Niagara, that it falls without speed. A cheerful, intelligent face is the end of culture, and success enough, for it indicates that the purpose of nature and wisdom attained. When our higher faculties are in activity, we are domesticated, and awkwardness and discomfort give place to natural and agreeable movements. It is noticed that the consideration of the great periods of space and astronomy induces a dignity of man and indifference to death. The influence of fine scenery, the presence of mountains, appease our irritations and elevates our friendship. Even a high dome and the expansive interior of a cathedral have a sensible effect on manners. I have heard that stiff people will lose something of their awkwardness under high ceilings and in spacious halls. I think sculpture and painting have an effect to teach us manners and abolish hurry. But overall, culture must reinforce from higher influx the empirical skills of eloquence, or of politics, or of trade, and the useful arts. There is a certain loftiness of thought and power to marshal and adjust particulars, which can only come from an insight of their whole connection. The orator who has once seen things in a divine order will never quite lose sight of this, and will come to affairs as from a higher ground, and though he will say nothing of philosophy, he will have a certain mastery in dealing with them, and an incapableness of being dazzled or frightened, which will distinguish his handling from that of attorneys and factors. A man who stands on a good footing with the head of parties at Washington, reads the rumors of the newspapers and the guesses of provincial politicians, with the key to the right and the wrong in each statement, and sees well enough where all this will end. Archimedes will look through your Connecticut machine at a glance and judge of its fitness. And much more, a wise man who knows not only what Plato but what St. John can show him, can easily raise the affairs he deals with to a certain majesty. Plato says Pericles owed his elevation to the lessons of Anaxagoras. Burke descended from a higher sphere than he would influence human affairs. Franklin, Adams, Jefferson, and Washington stood on a fine humanity, before which the brawls of modern senates are but pothouse politics. But there are higher secrets of culture, which are not for the apprentices but for the proficients. They are lessons only for the brave. We must know our friends under ugly masks. The calamities are our friends. Ben Jonson specifies in his address to the Muse, "Get him the time's long grudge, the court's ill will, and reconcile, keep him suspected still, make him lose all his friends, and what is worse, almost always to any better course. With me thou leavest a better muse than thee, and which thou broughtest me, blessed poverty." I wish to learn philosophy by rote, and play at heroism, but the wiser God said, "Take shame, the poverty, and the penal solitude, and belong to true speaking. Try the rough water as well as the smooth. Rough water can teach lessons worth knowing. When the state is unquiet, personal qualities are more than ever decisive. Fear not a revolution which will constrain you to live 5 years in one. Don't be so tender at making an enemy now and then. Be willing to go to Coventry sometimes, and let the populace bestow on you their coldest contempts. The finished man of the world must eat of every apple once. He must hold his hatred also at arm's length, and not remember spite. He has neither friends nor enemies, but values men only as channels of power. He who aims high must dread an easy home and popular manners. Heaven sometimes hedges the rare character about with ungainliness and odium, as a bird that protects the fruit. If there is any great and good thing in store for you, it will not come at the first or the second call, but in the shape of fashion, ease, and city drawing-rooms. Popularity is for dolls. Steep and craggy, said Porphyry, is the path of the gods. Open your Marcus Antonius. In the opinion of the ancients, he was the great man who scorned to shine, and who contested the frowns of fortune. They preferred the noble vessel too late for the tide, contending with winds and waves, dismantled and unrigged, to her companions borne into harbor with colors flying and guns firing. There is none of the social goods that may not be purchased too dear, and mere amiableness must not take rank with high aims and self-subsistency. Betine replies to Gerda's mother, who chides her disregard of dress, "If I cannot do as I have in mind, in our poor Frankfurt, I shall not carry things far." And the youth must rate at its true rank the inconceivable levity of local opinion. The longer we live, the more we must endure the elementary existence of men and women, and every brave heart must treat society as a child, and never allow it to dictate. All that class of the severe and restrictive virtues, said Burke, are almost too costly for humanity. Who wishes to be severe? Who wishes to resist the eminent and polite, in behalf of the poor and low and impolite? And who that dares do it, and can keep his temper sweet, his frolic spirits? The high virtues are not debonair, but have their redress in being illustrious at last. What forests of laurel we bring, and the tears of mankind, to those who stood firm against the opinion of their contemporaries. The measure of a master is his success in bringing all men round to his opinion 20 years later. Let me say here that culture cannot begin too early. In talking with scholars, I observed that they lost on ruder companions those years of boyhood which alone could give imaginative, literary, religious, and infinite quality in their esteem. I find, too, that the chance for appreciation is much increased by being the son of an appreciator, and that these boys who now grow up are caught not only years too late, but 2 or 3 births too late, to make the best scholars of. And I think it is a presentable motive of a scholar that, as in an old community, a well-born proprietor is usually found, after the first heats of youth, to be a careful husband, and to feel a habitual desire that the estate shall suffer no harm by his administration, but shall be delivered down to the next heir in a good condition as he received it, so a considerate man will reckon himself a subject to that secular amelioration by which mankind is mollified, cured, and refined, and will shun every expenditure of his forces on pleasure or gain, which will jeopardize the social and secular accumulation. The fossil strata show us that nature began with rudimentary forms, and rose to the more complex, as fast as the earth was fit for their dwelling place, and that the lower perish as the higher appear. Very few of our race can be said to be yet finished men. We still carry sticking in us some of the remains of the preceding inferior quadruped organization. We call these millions men, but they are not yet men. Half engaged in the soil, plotting to get free, man needs all the music that can be brought to disengage him. If love, red love, with tears and joy, if want, with his scourge, if war, with his cannonade, if Christianity, with its charity, if trade, with its money, if art, with its portfolios, if science, with her telegraphs, through the depths of space and time, can set his dull nerves throbbing, and by loud taps on the tough chrysalis break its walls, and let the new creature emerge erect and free, make way and sing Pan. The age of the quadruped is to go out. The age of the brain and the heart is to come in. The time will come when the evil forms we have known can no more be organized. Man's culture can spare nothing, wants all the material. He is to convert all impediments into instruments, all enemies into power. The formidable mischief we only make the more useful slave. And if one shall read the future of the race hinted in the organic effort of nature to mount and ameliorate, and the corresponding impulse to the better in the human being, we shall dare affirm that there is nothing he will not overcome and convert, but alas, culture shall absorb the chaos in Gehenna. It will convert the furies into muses, and the hells into benefit. End of Culture.